Yesterday, the Trump administration announced that it is halting approximately $259 million in federal Medicaid funding to the state of Minnesota, citing what officials describe as widespread fraud and abuse within the system. Vice President J.D. Vance, appearing alongside Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator Dr. Oz, announced this pause on Wednesday. Dr. Oz clarified that the state, Minnesota, still has funds available to continue the necessary services, but will not be receiving federal repayment until a solution is in place. Until then, the federal government will withhold these reimbursement payments. Here's Dr. Oz announcing it.
Said differently, and I'll just put the numbers out there, it's going to be $259 million of deferred payments for Medicaid to Minnesota, which we're announcing as I speak to Governor Walz and his team. And that's based on an audit of the last 3 months of 2025. Restated, $250 million is not going to be paid this month to Minnesota for its Medicaid claims. Now that's $250 million of money. That's your money. It's your taxpayer money. And these home and community-based services, which again are services that are typically things you would do for your family, but for whatever reason your family's not there to provide them, are very hard to audit. And for that reason, there's been a lot of slippage. The guardrails have not been well maintained, and if you're not serious about the integrity of the program, you'll see these problems happening in your state, which is why Minnesota's not alone, although they're the first to receive this action.
Over the past 4 months, the Trump administration has been heavily investigating the state of Minnesota, and through this, investigators uncovered multiple cases of alleged fraud, including providers serving children with autism who submitted claims for services that were never actually delivered. Vice President J.D. Vance explains this more.
A lot of people are getting rich off the generosity of American taxpayers, but more fundamentally and more importantly than that, it means that there are kids in Minnesota who deserve these services, who need these services, and they're not going to those kids. They're going to fraudsters in Minneapolis. That is unacceptable, and that's the sort of thing that we're cutting off with this action today.
Vice President J.D. Vance and Dr. Oz emphasized that this action, withholding over $200 million in Medicaid funds, is due to leadership, not American taxpayers, stating that this unchecked Medicaid payments amount to, quote, defrauding the American taxpayer. Dr. Oz, in a statement during the announcement, said that this is not a problem with the people of Minnesota. It's a problem with leadership of Minnesota and other states who don't take Medicaid preservation seriously. Any delay in services is going to be and should be laid at the seat of Governor Walz. The administration has given Minnesota Governor Tim Walz a 60-day deadline to present a corrective plan. Vance and Dr. Oz indicate that along with Minnesota, there are going to be other states following suit. Specifically, California and New York have been mentioned, but no formal announcement has been made. To follow this developing story, you can go to thecentersquare.com. Along with this announcement of war on fraud, the President Trump announced during his State of the Union this continued act by the administration to hold states accountable. I spoke with one of our Center Square reporters to discuss this more. Take a look. Today we have here with us on the Center Square Daily our Center Square reporter covering Michigan and currently Minnesota is Elyse Apel to talk a little bit about President Trump's State of the Union address on Tuesday in regards to his, quote, war on fraud. Elyse, on Tuesday, President Trump talked a little bit about his declaration of war on fraud during his address, how he named Vice President J.D. Vance as the leader of the task force. Here's a clip of him talking a little bit about it, and I'd love to get your reaction.
There's been no more stunning example than Minnesota, where members of the Somali community have pillaged an estimated $19 billion from the American taxpayer. Oh, we have all the information. And in actuality, the number is much higher than that. And California, Massachusetts, Maine, and many other states are even worse. This is the kind of corruption that shreds the fabric of a nation, and we are working on it like you wouldn't believe. So tonight, although started 4 months ago, I am officially announcing the war on fraud to be led by our great Vice President J.D. Vance.
What are your thoughts, Elyse? $19 billion, that's a lot of money for one state. And now we're going to see this investigation continue around the country. Where is that specific investigation with Minnesota at today? I know you've been following it the past month and a half. And what could we potentially see with other states?
Yeah, so President Trump's announcement on Tuesday night, it was an announcement, but really just a continuation of what the administration has been doing. Like Trump said, for about 4 months now. We are dozens of arrests in. The estimates are anywhere from $9 to $19 billion, depending on who you ask, with many people saying it's actually even much more than that. And that's even just looking at the fraud just in Minnesota. Like Trump said, this is going to be an ongoing issue for his administration. It's been something that they've been really concerned about looking at Minnesota. And it's been really, it's super interesting because this is obviously happening all over the country. As the Center Square reporters are reporting in many states where we've seen fraud throughout the country, but Minnesota has really been the pinnacle for it. It's really been kind of in some ways, the Democrats would say the scapegoat for these massive fraud allegations. But from the Republican side, they're saying no. The issues that we're seeing in Minnesota are actually it is more central in Minnesota, and they're even alleging that government officials knew about the fraud and have been allowing it to happen. So I think Minnesota is really the pinnacle for this issue, but the Trump administration is really looking to try to take this war across the nation and dig into fraud in every state.
Yeah. And for those that haven't necessarily been following this, Elyse, if you could kind of highlight what have been those issues, when did this start? What specifically rose some questions within the state of Minnesota? Where, is this fraud specifically coming from? And is this going to be something that the administration is going to look into it in other states similarly, same organizations, same kinds of groups? Thoughts?
Yeah, so the federal government actually has been investigating this for a number of months. They started making arrests this past fall, but then kind of November, December, there was some investigative reporting done by some independent journalists that really brought this to the forefront of national attention. And so that really kicked off this a real federal investigation into it. And like I said, they've made dozens of arrests already, but they're promising that many more are going to come. As for some of the programs, child care programs have been a big focus. Other welfare programs like, SNAP programs, just all of these different welfare programs, but really child care programs have been a big focus. And the administration's actually cut funding to a number of states, citing concerns about fraud. So this is just really, we can talk about how big of an issue it is in Minnesota, and President Trump referenced the Somali immigration community there. There's been a lot of arrests in that community, but it really is a nationwide problem.
Yeah, and just like you said, they're going to continue to figure out what fraud is happening in other states and continue to freeze funds. Some of the states President Trump mentioned, California, Colorado, Illinois, New York, which is no surprise. It's a predominantly, Democratic state. And so what are your thoughts on, that relation first? With these, more blue states popping up with some of this fraud issue, as well as some of the reactions that we saw from Democrats on the floor during the State of Union address?
Yeah, I think the correlation there is really interesting. I think probably blue states have higher amounts of these immigrant communities, so that could be one factor there. I mean, like you said, right, Trump really had no issue on Tuesday night calling out the Somali community. And we had some pretty big reactions from some of the Minnesota representatives, particularly U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar. She is herself an immigrant from Somalia, and so she did not appreciate the president's comments. He referred to Somali pirates. So he definitely did not hold back on addressing the Somali community. And Representative Ilhan Omar was very vocal in her concerns with what President Trump was saying. She heckled him numerous times. She called him liar very vocally during the address, and eventually actually stormed out. So that was definitely something interesting to watch on Tuesday night, was the back and forth between Trump and the Democrat side of the aisle.
Yeah, I definitely think that it goes without saying it was quite a entertaining and interesting State of the Union to watch, especially since it was one of the longest speeches that we've seen in this country. Relating back to something you mentioned a little bit ago, was these states that we're seeing kind of a lot of this fraud pop up is predominantly within the immigration community, right? As you said, Representative Ilhan Omar is herself an immigrant. Going back to this idea, especially within Minnesota, we've seen this fraud happening with Somali daycare and other organizations, as well as the rise in immigration enforcement and the various stories that we've seen come out of that state. What is your take on, Minnesota Democrats refusing to stand when the president, mentioned immigration, how prioritizing American citizens should be the first thing, for representatives, for those that are serving the country over illegal immigrants? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that'll be probably the pivotal takeaway for many people that were watching the address. Like you mentioned, it was an hour and 45 minutes. I think that's definitely, that moment will be the takeaway for many people. When President Trump turned to the Democrats and asked, if you support American citizens over illegal aliens, stand up. And they did not stand. Like you said, from the Minnesota delegation of those that were there, not a single one of them stood. So I think Republicans, I think Minnesotans, I think Americans really saw that. And going into Election Day, I think that's going to be a clip that Republicans really turn to over and over again. Are these people that you want to reelect and to be in office and to represent you as American citizens? So I think we're going to see that clip over and over again going into the election season.
Absolutely. Election season is coming up, and I feel like that is definitely going to be on a lot of voters' mind, especially with fraud impacting the taxpayer. Elyse, thanks so much for joining us. And for those that are interested in following more of our stories, you can go to thecentersquare.com.